I always come back to the old house. What if it's empty? What if we just peeked inside?
Do you think that there's still hope for San Francisco to kind of return to what it was, or?
I think there is hope, you know? It's like we're telling a story, it's a movie, so, you know, in terms of the character, I feel like, you know, maybe he just, you know, was like, hey, you know, maybe I gotta just be like my grandpa did. My grandpa came over here from Alabama, like maybe I gotta go start my legacy somewhere else. But I think there's hope, man, especially, I mean, at the Castro, you know, being at the Castro and having the premiere there, and then the energy that was there and all the people that showed up and stuff, like, that was sort of a moment of, you know, like, yeah, it just was a moment. It just seemed like, yeah, maybe, you know, maybe we can bring it back to that sort of thing. That was like a little...
It was like a rallying cry.
Yeah, or
almost,
something.
just the event itself.
Yeah.
That's making me think of you can't hate it unless you love it.
Yes.
And was that, I mean, is that a line that was specifically written for the movie? Did you hear that elsewhere? Was that something you guys had kind of said to each other just growing up? Like, where did that line come from?
That particular line, which is probably the most quoted line, I feel like, in the movie, I think it's just it's a universal sort of sentiment that, you know, a lot of natives have. If you're from San Francisco, you usually really love, you know, and any chance you get, you tell people you're from there, and you're always defending your city and stuff. But I mean, but that's, you know, that's pretty much anywhere though. I feel like too. So yeah, I think it was important to get that in there, and yeah, we wrote that, but it was a universal sentiment we kind of all had. It just made sense.
We built these ships, dredged these canals in the San Francisco they never knew existed. This is our home. We two stick together.
Of course, you've got Danny Glover and Mike Epps, and you've got some folks that...
Danny also from San Francisco.
I didn't know that. Okay, that makes sense.
Danny grew up, he's sort of like the walking tour of the film is his life.
Wow.
Because Danny grew up, he spent some time in Hunters Point, where Montgomery's house is. And then he also had a house in the Haight-Ashbury, and, you know, spent a lot of time in the Fillmore, where Jimmie's house is in real life. That was the inspiration behind the film.
Yeah.
So Danny's like, when you grow up in San Francisco, everyone has a Danny Glover story because he's our icon.
Yeah.
You know, not just for his work as an actor, but as an activist. So we were very lucky to get Danny in this.
I watched the movie, and I'm seeing the scenes where there's this audience that comes together for Montgomery's play in the home, upstairs in the home, and I'm kind of thinking of it as mirroring this premiere that you guys had. You know, that there's friends and family in this community that came together. These people that all... It was just a really interesting thought. I wondered if you had...
That idea that the play felt like the premiere, Montgomery's play feels like the premiere we just had, the Castro in San Francisco, is really interesting because it's sort of a play about death. And about Jimmie's fight to stay in San Francisco. I hadn't thought about that until you said it. Yeah. But that is interesting, and also beyond just the larger characters in the film that come back for the play of Jimmie's Aunt Wanda, played by Tashina, Rob Morgan plays Jimmie's dad, Danny and Mike Epps. There also are other San Franciscans we grew up with peppered throughout the audience. Ryan Dubiago, who's one of our like longtime collaborators. And so it that is interesting. I guess in some ways it did feel a little bit like that at the Castro. Someone came up to us at Sundance after the premiere. He was kind of emotional. He's an older man, and he just said, "The spirit of Hal Ashby lives." And for us and like our larger group of collaborators, that meant the world to us because, you know, I actually hadn't seen Harold and Maude growing up. And Leah Giblin, who works at CineReach, had said to me at one point, "You should watch Harold and Maude. I think you'd like it," when we were still in the early stages of working on the script. And so I did, and I, you know, cried and cried. And there were a lot of things that felt, you know, very personal in that movie. I grew up on a lot of music from that period in San Francisco. You know, they used Cat Stevens, but very closely related to that. It's a lot of like, you know, Jefferson Airplane, Janice, and Moby Grape. And that movie was, to me, felt like one of the more interesting depictions of the Bay Area. It feels almost like Gothic in this foggy and sort of British almost, interpretation of like the Bay. I think that's why a lot of people don't think of Harold and Maude being in the Bay Area, but it is. And then just what a like lovely depiction of, of love and friendship and across, whatever different boundaries and age. And I think one thing that really stuck with me from that movie, our first draft of the script, I think was angrier, more critical of the people that we thought were responsible for gutting the city that we loved. And that movie did such a beautiful job of like giving love and empathy even to the characters that like are not supportive of Harold and Maude's love. And I think that we tried to like take some of that from the film and give everyone a little bit more empathy, because I think that's a part of being a San Franciscan, is seeing people that way in all forms of themselves.
We could throw parties. You can put on one of your plays. We could yell.
Where is this house?
Our old house.
That's not your old house, and that's not your neighborhood.
I've seen some writing online about there being this like renaissance of Bay Area films, and last year with Blind Spotting and Sorry to Bother You coming out, and this kind of feels like it's maybe part of that. Like, I wondered if you guys had kind of heard about that, and what it feels to like, be part
I've
of
heard
that.
it. Have you heard? Yeah, I've heard that once.
Yeah. I mean, Boots is a great guy. Boots, I met when we first started working on this movie. He was in the early stages of Sorry to Bother You. And so I think in the Bay, there aren't that many filmmakers, narrative filmmakers there. So you're sort of aware of each other and trying in your ways to be supportive. I'd see him, as we were sort of developing over the years, and we'd check in and, he'd tell me about how casting was going or financing and same. So I think it, there is something in the water in the Bay that leads to stories like this. I think the kind of interesting complexity within that is that, like, as tight as the Bay Area is, and in some ways, particularly for those of us that are from the Bay, it's gotten tighter and tighter as there's fewer and fewer of us. Oakland can feel like a long sort of journey from San Francisco, and so I think we were really like proud of those guys making those movies in the East Bay. But in San Francisco, you look around and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of other narrative films being made. As we were making this, you're kind of in a way, your own sort of shell. And, as Jimmie and I and our group of friends that kind of working on this, I think that's one of the things that makes it hard to exist in San Francisco is you just don't meet. It's not a place where artists are coming to be, poets like they were, with the Beats. They're not coming to be Janis Joplin anymore. And so it's kind of, I think, the onus is on the natives from there to be the artists telling the stories about San Francisco.
I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this.
But I'm not leaving. I'm the last one left.
I'm with you, brother.